Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of DMV Confidential. I'm Kenzie Chase.
And I'm Jenny Gable.
And today we have a brand new episode for you guys, like always. So the one we want to talk to you guys about today happened in September 2018. And the reason why this one is a little bit different than some of the other ones we covered is that investigators are going to have a hard time sort of moving the case forward because of who this person is and the circles that he ran in. So the story we want to talk to you guys about today is about the murder of Ike Phelps.
Yeah, so it was September 5th, 2018 in Spotsylvania County when police were called to a residential townhome area in the Mill Garden area for shots fired. Someone had been struck by gunfire, and when they got there, that's when they found Ike Phelps, who had been shot. It was around 2 a.m. that day.
Yeah, and so police also, we spoke to a detective on this from the sheriff's office, and he did tell us that it was sort of like a warm night around mid-70s. By the time, obviously, investigators got there, it was dark outside because it was 2 a.m. And they kind of started trying to find, they found the man, they found Phelps, and they first tried to start CPR, but unfortunately they were not able to save him.
Yeah, so they weren't able to save him. He actually had 2 gunshot wounds. The detective told us one had punctured his face area. That one was the fatal gunshot wound. And he was also hit above his chest area there. So, they tried to save him and unfortunately weren't able to. And it was dark, as you mentioned, Kenzie. So police were out there with lights and K9 searching the area for any suspects. They're actually out there on scene for about 10 to 12 hours collecting evidence, searching the area.
Yeah, which is a very long time. I mean, 10 to 12 hours collecting evidence. They actually said that the area that they were covering spanned about 75 yards, give or take. So that's like a long area to sort of be surveilling.
Yeah, and also, as you said earlier, it was the middle of the night, too, so I can imagine, trying to search the area for any evidence and, if there's anybody around in the middle of the night would make it an extra level of difficulty there. But as you said, Kenzie, it was about a 75-yard area of the crime scene. There was actually specifically kind of 2 crime scenes that the detective mentioned to us. So one area was actually where... from the house, because it spanned kind of from this townhouse where he was found in the parking lot, and actually to a second location where he was actually with another person at the time who'd ran over that way.
Yeah, so we'll get more into the second person because he's very important later on.
Yes.
But yeah, so there was 2 different areas that they were mainly looking at to collect evidence, and some of the evidence that they collected included beer, bottle cans, glass, because I guess Phelps was carrying a case of beer, and so they collected broken beer bottles. They collected cigarette lighters, some cigarettes. So
yeah, just collected random things like that. I guess fell out of his pockets. They mentioned that, which we'll get into more later, but he was with a friend at the time when the shooting happened, and that's when the gunfire kind of rang out. So they were just kind of on scene collecting anything that they could find in the parking lot area where he was shot. And they actually did specify to us that they collected several cartridge casings from a pistol.
Well, yeah, they collected several casings, and then they also collected, they believe that well over 40 rounds were fired between weapons, and that's weapons plural because they do believe that multiple guns were used in this incident.
Yeah, so a lot of gunshots rang out in this townhome area, and the detective that we spoke to did mention that this area kind of can be seen. It has experienced some sort of drug trafficking in the neighborhood. So, but this was the major first incident like this that they had really seen.
Yeah, so like you mentioned, Jenny, this area. He describes it as not necessarily the best area you're known to see a drug deal or two, but something to this extent was not very common at the time.
Yeah. So I guess to a little bit more about who Ike Phelps was himself. So they find him, unfortunately weren't able to save him. And once they identified him, they actually, Spotsylvania police realized that they've actually had several run-ins with him in the past. He was kind of known to law enforcement in the area.
Right, which is never really a good thing, I would think, if you're known to law enforcement. So Yes, law enforcement were familiar with him. He's had several run-ins with the law, mostly for drug charges. Correct me if I'm wrong. So because of that, I think that's part of what made some of this difficult, just because of the circles that he was running with, made the witnesses and some of the testimonies a little bit less reliable.
Yeah. Yeah, because some of the people, as a matter of fact, the detective we spoke to, Detective Horn, mentioned that while EMS and police were still on scene kind of collecting evidence and trying to figure out what had happened, about 5 people actually showed up shortly after the shooting took place, asking kind of what happened, like, and they seemed they had also were suspicious to police, maybe criminally involved. So that was something that they noted.
Right, because their main question was, I mean, at this point in the investigation, there's only detectives and EMS. So how are these people finding out so soon that something had happened is the main thing.
In the middle of the night.
Yeah,
too.
in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
2 a.m. is when the shooting happened. So in the middle of the night, how are these people suddenly finding out how this what happened? And so that was suspicious to investigators too, about how did the word spread.
Yeah, so we'll also get into that more as well, but Phelps himself was kind of known to law enforcement. Detective Horn said Phelps was his first foot pursuit when he joined, which I thought that just really struck me as interesting. He had different encounters for things like small drug possession, fleeing from law enforcement, things like of that nature.
And something that I want to just kind of talk about with Phelps is that detectives even said that, like, if he had something on him, like, Phelps would tell investigators and then just kind of book it. Yeah. So he was known to get in vehicle pursuits. He was known to flee from officers. But if he was ever caught, either before or after he was caught, he would divulge to investigators exactly where, what he had on him. And
what I thought was interesting about that, Kenzie, is that they mentioned that part of it they believe is because in cases like this, when people have drugs on them, if, they're taken to the jail facilities and things like that with the possession still on them, it upgrades the charges. So maybe trying to be like before they're apprehended, letting police know. But that was also something that I thought was interesting. But yeah, unfortunately, he did die in the shooting, and he was in his mid-30s at the time.
Yeah. So now we're kind of go into a little bit more about what actually happened that night. So this kind of gets a little confusing just because there are so many people involved that investigators rightfully won't name because, it could jeopardize the investigation, and you also don't want to put someone on blast that didn't have something to do with the investigation. But so we're going to go by like person A, person B, and person C. And then we're going to also talk about Phelps's girlfriend.
Yeah.
So those are the people those are the names that we're going to be using moving forward when we're talking about these specific people. So at one point, Phelps was hanging out with person A.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so person A, he actually was, I believe he was visiting a friend, actually. Person A, my apologies. Again, with no names makes it a little bit difficult. Person A had dropped Phelps off at one location to meet with a friend.
Yeah, so person A and Phelps had been hanging out for a little bit. Then eventually he drops Phelps off to hang out with person B.
Yes.
Person B and Phelps then hang out for a little while and then eventually go back to person B's townhome.
Yes, and that's where the shooting took place. And person B kind of was also shot at by the gunfire. It was his townhome that Phelps was visiting at the time.
Right. So he's hanging out with person B. The shooting happens. Person B books it. And that they do believe that Phelps himself was shot at pretty close range, I think about 3 feet away.
Yes.
But they do believe most of the shots fired were towards person B following that. And person B was able to escape, didn't get shot. Mm-hmm. But during this whole thing, when investigators are looking into Phelps's death, that's when person A, who had dropped him off earlier, had shown up, which was suspicious to investigators specifically because person A had dropped Phelps off to hang out, and then he had went like 30 miles north.
Yeah, so that's a pretty far distance to be driving and then arrive back on scene pretty quickly. So that was something that was definitely suspicious to them. And referencing Phelps's girlfriend, who was the mother of his children. They also noted that during this time when Phelps was being driven by person A, she was trying to reach him, calling his phone, trying to figure out exactly where he was, and wasn't able to get a hold of him.
Right. And the girlfriend also, she does have 2 kids with Phelps. So she basically said that the reason why she was contacting them was for like child support reasons or something regarding the kids. That's why she was trying to get a hold of Phelps. But she was at some point looked at by investigators as potentially having something to do with the case. The investigators throughout this have multiple suspects, but
yeah, there was different people that were named throughout the investigation, but she was someone that they had brought in. Detective Horn mentioned to us that she wasn't initially the most cooperative, but they were able to kind of speak with her about, why was she calling his phone, was unable to reach him, and then this is when this shooting took place. But there was also another person who comes up that is named, and that is person C, and they're kind of divulged as sort of a primary suspect in this case.
Yes, so person C is eventually the person that investigators are looking at to actually have done the shooting. And this person, I just kind of want to talk about some of the challenges with this case so far, because all of the people so far, person B, a lot of these witnesses that had anything to do with this have some sort of background that makes them unreliable to investigators.
Yeah.
And so they're going through this. They're talking to person A, they're talking to person B, they're talking to the girlfriend, and all of them, I think the tendency is to be very self-effacing, and that's not reliable to investigators who are trying to get to the bottom of what actually happened here. So I kind of want to play a clip briefly about some of the challenges that our investigators are facing because of who these people are.
Because when you can't go off the integrity of the people you're interviewing, now you got to go to electronic type forensics. We've got to start doing phone dumps. We got to start doing tower dumps, different stuff like that. Going around looking for any kind of security cameras, ring door cameras. That's going to be the stuff that's going to be more reliable than testimony that you get from some of these people.
Yeah, so it's kind of like you said, Kenzie, and from the interview, a lot of allegations were made from different people as to who was responsible for the shooting, but detectives felt like some people that were naming suspects, for example, had their own personal motives in potentially doing it, and it was a lot of kind of hearsay, which makes it hard for investigators in a case like this.
Well, and also people that weren't willing to speak on the record.
Yeah.
So they might have good information, but if no one's going to be able to go on the record and say it, that kind of also puts them in a tricky place. For example, one person did give information to investigators that was helpful, but this individual was incarcerated and seemingly wanted something out of it.
Yeah.
And they gave information that they would only be able to know if the suspect themselves had told them.
Yeah.
But because they were incarcerated, they had a criminal history, they also weren't super reliable as far as on the record sources to kind of nail the person.
Yeah, so it was really just kind of a lot of hearsay in this case. And, without kind of ironclad evidence, it makes it hard for investigators to really charge someone.
Yeah, and they did interview the family as well. The dad did not have any criminal history, but his sister did, and also some of the nephews also had criminal history. So, I can't imagine some of the challenges with this of just witnesses are so important to cases that to not have one that you can rely on, because that the prosecutor and the defense attorney are going to go back and forth over the reliability of these witnesses.
And as a matter of fact, the person who was with Phelps at the time of the shooting, we did ask Detective Horn, were they kind of looked at as a suspect? He told us that they were actually very cooperative in the investigation. They believed that he may have actually, feared for his own safety. Again, he was also shot at in the shooting. But they did conduct a search warrant at his house and things of that nature, and he was really cooperative there.
They did, they conducted a bunch of search warrants, and I think they were trying to do the best that they can when you don't have reliable witnesses. And I think the best thing with some of these cases is just technology, because how else are you going to be able to get to the bottom of some of this?
Yeah. They actually also conducted a search warrant on Phelps's girlfriend's car, because at one point they did believe that she may have had some involvement or conspired with someone in the shooting. And they also did a search warrant on Phelps's phone.
Yes. So again, they're doing a lot of search warrants. They're executing like ones at person B's home. They're doing all that they can, I think. And nothing really is coming out of it that's concrete enough to actually make an arrest. So what do they do eventually? I mean, they even take DNA from person C. When they finally get in touch with person C, this was a challenge in of itself, because they didn't even get person C's name until like months after this initial incident, right? And then they had the challenges of trying to actually get in contact with him. Well, eventually he was actually arrested for something else in a different jurisdiction.
Yeah.
And then they went and interviewed him and tried to get information from him, but
he didn't want to speak without his attorney present. So that also made it a little bit more difficult for investigators. But again, they also, as you said, specify that time is really important in these cases, and they didn't even get his name until months later.
Yeah. So with all of that being said, with the interviews that they can conduct, with very little evidence, I mean, they collected a lot of evidence from the scene as far as casings and things like that, but with nothing to really nail someone, the case does go cold. So after the case goes cold, investigators are continuing looking into what could have happened.
Yeah, and they, as we said earlier, didn't really have any credible witnesses from the interviews. It's just a lot of hearsay at this point, considering the backgrounds of maybe people who are coming forward. And they actually checked Ring doorbell camera footage and things like that, but there was no video that captured the actual suspects. There was video that kind of captured some people fleeing, but they weren't able to identify who they were from the video.
Yes, and Detective Horn even said that at one point there was sort of kind of a witness. Someone had apparently looked out their window just 30 seconds too late, essentially. Yeah. By the time that they looked out their window to kind of look at what was going on, nothing really noteworthy happened. I mean, the scene had already happened. So, I mean, if that person would have just looked out a little sooner, you know, maybe the case would have gone differently at this point. But, I mean, honestly, if I heard gunshots, I would be taking cover. And so It's not really this person's fault, but it's just some of the things that, like, timing is so important with some of these cases.
Yeah, they also actually conducted something called tower dumps, where they tried to kind of decipher phone numbers that came through at the time of the around the shooting to figure out who was who, but that didn't really resolve in any sort of being able to identify any suspects there. And when searching Phelps's cell phone data, they weren't able to really decipher anything relevant to the investigation either from that.
Right.
So,
something that I think is important as far as how we sort of got some of these suspects too is, because remember, again, the girlfriend at one point was a suspect. She has 2 kids with Phelps. Person A at one point was looked at. Person B was sort of looked at. Person C is this main suspect. Well, all of these people had some sort of intimate relationship with the girlfriend. They were all involved.
Yeah, I believe person A and person C and Phelps all had the detective described as sort of an intimate
sexual relationship.
So that could also present different motives or reasons there. Yeah. But they did say that because Phelps was known for his local drug dealing activity, that the main motive suspected had to deal with drugs in this case.
But I think that's part of what the challenge is with some of this, of why they're looking at sort of all 3 of them, is because
they all have some sort of tie.
They all had some sort of relationship to each other. And investigators thought it was odd that the girlfriend was calling Phelps right before this all happened, that person A had dropped him off, then went north,
arrived
and then
so
came
quickly.
back soon. Person C, we don't really know much about person C's whereabouts leading up to the shooting. All that we know is that this person's name came up, and
They're believed to have shot him.
yes.
Yes.
So what can help move some of this case forward? Well, I kind of want to talk briefly about some of the challenges again with this cold case. So let me just play a clip again real quick from Detective Horn.
How much and how far do I dig to try to find something to prove that this guy is the one that did this? And when the evidence isn't there, it just isn't there.
Nobody's coming forward.
Yeah, nobody's gonna come forward.
We have no surveillance.
So you start talking about technology. Technology is always gonna be your best witness. If I can get it on video, I can get it on audio. That's gonna force a lot of people to tell the truth. How much and how far do I?
Yeah, so as he said, technology is really a big driver in a lot of these cases where they're able to kind of get that evidence that's more substantial in order to charge someone. But he also did tell us that something else that would really help push this case forward is if they were actually able to recover the firearm that was used.
Yes. So if anybody has information like that, we're going to put a number for you guys to call. You guys can call the office and give them what you have. And so hopefully that there can actually be some justice in this case. We did also ask, just because this is such a unique case for us, we asked the detective if he handles these cases any differently, specifically cases that, the person has a criminal history. Does that actually impact how much effort he puts into it, how hard he's looking? And Detective Horn said that it doesn't. And so I want to play a clip of him talking about how he handles all of his cases.
You have to handle every case the same. You have to look for the evidence. You have to, do your interviews. You can't treat one with any less attention than you do the other. That's how you end up missing stuff, or you end up getting the wrong person. So you got to follow the evidence when you're dealing with these cases. And whether you've committed 10 felonies or this is your first one, I'm going to go at you the same way I would anybody else.
Yeah, detectives really put in a lot of work to look at this case, and they're still looking at it, but they told us that they looked at it specifically for over 2 years, but with all of the challenges it posed with the criminal element involved and things like that, it really just made it more difficult for them. But that doesn't stop them, the criminal element aspect, from continuing to push forward to get answers and
Right.
Justice.
Right, and it shouldn't, because
Yeah.
at the end of the day, this person lost his life.
Yeah.
And regardless of his background, regardless of his history, we don't know his life, we don't know his circumstances, but someone was killed, and there still needs to be some justice that follows that.
Yeah, I mean, he was a family member, a father, a son. So it's, getting justice for the family is still very crucial, and detectives are still looking for, they actually mentioned that as well as pushing the case forward would help do that is eyewitnesses. If anybody that did see anything who hasn't spoken to police came forward with information, that would also be very helpful for them.
Yes, so if you guys enjoyed this episode and you guys want to hear more episodes like this, we invite you to tune in to each week as we continue doing some of these cases for you in the DMV area. And we hope to see you next week.